Hi, Millennial leaders. I've got a great podcast for you today with Gavin Rollins, a Millennial leader who was the youngest elected official in Keystone Heights history. His passion for his community is contagious. If we fast forward a couple years in Gavin's life, he's running again, and this time it's for a commissioner seat in Clay County. I had the pleasure of meeting Gavin at a conference in Sarasota, and he wasn't even going to attend the conference. I know you'll appreciate all the wisdom he has to share. This might be the most content-rich podcast I've ever done. Gavin shares some great wisdom on building a team, finding a way, how the military shaped his leadership, how millennials should handle criticism, and how a leader should best show humility. I know you'll enjoy this podcast. Let's jump in.
Welcome to the Millennial Leader Podcast with Carlos Reyes, encouraging and equipping a generation to lead.
Hey, Millennial leaders, welcome to the 5th podcast. I can't believe we're this far along. I'm happy to have a friend of mine today, Gavin Rollins, who's got cool stories. He's also engaged in getting involved in politics. Gavin, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here for this.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we met, I guess it was a couple of months ago in Sarasota, Florida for a conference. And funny enough, you weren't even going to be a part of the conference.
Yeah, just going down because we had mutual friends, and it's always great to be around young leaders, leaders anywhere, but just young leaders who are excited and movers and shakers and making a difference and doing things. And so even if it's a little bit of a drive and it's tough to schedule in there, I always try to make the time. And so I actually am in the Army National Guard, and so I had drill that weekend. We were doing weapons qualification. So I wasn't able to attend the conference, but it was great to meet you, Carlos, and some of our mutual friends, kind of interact with them and just network and get to know and find out what's happening. And that always, I think, inspires and gets us all going, and we share ideas. And that's the name of the game these days, I think, is really figuring out how we can help each other out, because a lot of us have similar goals.
Absolutely. And the reason I reached out to you is because I did identify some of those leadership abilities in you. And so that's part of why I wanted to bring you on, invite you on. I'd love for you to kind of share a little bit about your background and your story with the Millennial Leader family.
Sure. Well, I have kind of an interesting, more localized story, but I think it's very important to get involved where you are. And when I was in 10th grade, I think, is kind of when I really started awakening to the idea and the importance of leadership. I was involved in my church youth group, and they went to a leadership conference in Washington, D.C. It was the second installment. They did a program called Student Leadership University, and Dr. Jay Strack is the founder of that organization and a great leader. And his mission is to inspire young leaders. And what his goal is to give them a 10 to 15-year head start, a quantum leap, kind of into the future, and inspire them that you don't have to wait till later down the road to make a difference. You can start right where you are and make a difference right where you're at. And so in 10th grade, hearing that and being in Washington, D.C. as the backdrop for the second one, the 201 program for that, it really inspired me and something clicked. I had always wanted to kind of lead and make a difference, but something clicked when it came to specifically being able to make a difference in the public policy governmental arena. And so I got back, and one of the things that they talked about at that conference, Bob Record, who is a mutual friend of ours and a great leader, he talked about the importance of mentors. And he talked about how Caleb and Joshua and others throughout the Bible had mentors. And he said, I want you to go back to your town and get a mentor. And so I did. I actually went back to a gentleman that I had known only briefly, but I looked at his life, and he was doing some neat things. He was involved in military leadership, involved in the school board locally. And so I kind of just on a whim, he jokingly says, I just knocked on his door out of the clear blue and asked him if I'd mentor him. So that started a really neat mentoring leadership journey. And then I ended up graduating high school, going off for some training with the Army National Guard. I joined in 2007 the Florida Army National Guard, which is a branch kind of the National Guard, and you do active Army training for a portion of that. So I went to basic combat training and advanced individual training and started out as an enlisted person. Came back from that and had been involved in my community and saw a need and an opportunity to run for city council. Well, actually, let me take a step back before that happened, because one of the questions you asked is what are some successes and failures? And before I had the opportunity to run for city council, I'd kind of been inspired and wanted to get involved. And so I ran for student body president when I was at Santa Fe College, which is a community college, now a state college in Florida. Well, I lost. I actually got my butt whipped, and so it would have been easy to get very discouraged from that experience and say, "Oh man, if I can't be student body president at Santa Fe, then what makes me think I'll ever be able to make a difference and get involved?" But what I did was I tried to take a different approach, and so I sat down and I literally took out a piece of paper and I said, "Okay, Gavin, you can either learn from this experience and really grow through it, or you can just get discouraged by it." And so I chose to learn from it and sat down and I wrote out a list of things that I had learned from that experience. And one of them was building a team. I had tried to kind of do it myself to a certain extent and hadn't really vetted some of the people I was running with real thoroughly. And so and I had to take a hard look at my approach, and I realized how important building a team was going to be. And then another thing, a couple other things I learned were the importance of clarifying a vision, and then just that failure was going to be part of the process. Sometimes the timing isn't right and that kind of thing. So really learned from that, went away to basic combat training, about a year on active duty, and then came back and re-enrolled in college and was finishing up my associate's degree and transferring to the University of Florida. And in that process, saw an opportunity to run for Keystone Heights City Council. I'm from a small town in North Florida called Keystone Heights. A bunch of people from Pennsylvania came down and settled it, and so it's named after the Keystone State, and it's a higher elevation in Florida, if you can say that. I mean, you're from Carlos, Florida's a fairly flat state, but it's a little bit of an elevation. And so three things were passions of mine in looking at that. I wanted to make sure that we kept family values strong. I wanted to keep the local economy. We were having tough economic times like everyone else in 2009, and so I wanted to make sure we kept taxes low, kept things business friendly, and we didn't think that government was the solution and try to raise everyone's taxes to recoup city losses of financial revenue and that kind of thing. And then I also wanted to work on, we have low lake levels in the area. We have a lot of beautiful lakes, but a lot of them have gotten real low throughout the years for a variety of reasons. And so those are my three things. So I ended up running, and again, learning from that past experience, I built a team of people who, and that was really the key to the success, is there's no way as a 22-year-old still in college, trying to also serve in the military and running for Keystone Heights City Council, there's no way I would have been able to achieve that if it had been about me. But it wasn't. We built a team, and there were a lot of people in that who were passionate about those issues, and that team effort was won the day. And so we did a lot. We walked door to door. We did website. We did social media. We did a mail out. We did a auto dial. Everything you can think of pretty much in politics, left no stone unturned. And on election night, I won by a landslide of 3 votes. So
wow.
Every vote really does count, and it's neat. I still, to this day, people will come up to me and share stories of how they came last minute to the polls and that they were one of those 3 votes. And I still remember one lady. I went to her door, and she was a supporter, but she had her baby in her hands, and she said, "I'm not going to be able to get out and vote. My husband's not home yet, and I don't have anyone to watch the baby." And I said, "My mom and my sister-in-laws are all at the polls. They'll watch your baby for you if you don't mind just coming up and voting. We can make that happen and watch your baby for you." And so we really just did everything we could to make sure that everyone turned out and voted. And clearly, the 3 votes made the difference. And my opponent was a gracious. He accepted the results of that. He could have gone for a recount, that kind of thing, but he was a gracious man. And that was an interesting process because the gentleman I ran against had 30 years of experience in business, and that's how he started our first debate. I still remember during the campaign, he said, "I have 30 years of experience in business," and so that can be kind of intimidating. And so I jokingly, when it came time for me to respond, I jokingly said, "Well, I've been alive for 22 years." And so everyone laughed, and then once kind of the tension was broken, then I started to share what my vision was for the city. And I think experience matters, but I think what's most important to people is your vision, where you want to go with things, and your specific plan of how you're going to get there. And that, I think, proved true in this election. It wasn't just about the past or how long you had been alive. It was about your specific vision and passion for the community. And I was able to clearly articulate that, and then with the team around us, we were able to be successful. And then serving was an interesting experience. I served for a 1-year term, and we were able to do some pretty neat things. One of the things that came up immediately was they wanted to raise taxes, property taxes, 150%. At first was the goal, and then I said, I'm not going along with that. And so then they said they were going to compromise and only raise it 64%. And I still had some concerns, and I had not made a pledge that I would not raise taxes under any circumstances, but I did say I was just naturally against the idea and wanted a compelling reason. If we were going to raise taxes, I needed a compelling reason, and I never got one. I just got a lot of intimidation tactics and a lot of "you're too young to understand," that kind of thing. But I never heard a compelling reason why this was going to benefit the citizens of Clay County or specifically Keystone Heights. And so I ended up voting against it. And the way our government is structured in Florida, city councils, anything above a 12% increase in your property tax rate has to be unanimous. Every board member, every city council member has to vote on that and vote for it. And so even though it was a 4-1 vote and I stood alone, my vote vetoed 52% of the increase. And so the next newspaper article read, Councilman Rollins says no to tax hike. And it was just kind of interesting how when you know where you stand, you can make a difference, even though you might be just one of 5 or might seem like the numbers are against you. If you know where you stand, you really can make a difference and be able to advocate. And so I had a lot of people who would come up to me and tell me, they're on a fixed income and they really appreciated my vote because it's a couple $100 that was the difference for them, and everywhere around them they were getting kind of hit. And so that was a neat experience, and we worked, had a couple issues. One issue that came up was we had a farmer's market where some folks locally wanted to hand out constitutions and wanted to have a prayer booth at the farmer's market, and they were originally told that they weren't allowed to do that. And when they brought that to my attention, we dealt with that in the meeting, the next city council meeting, and I asked very specifically, does it say anywhere in our charter that we can't do that? I mean, that's a free speech issue, and
right.
We were able to fix that, and so they were then allowed to hand out constitutions and do their prayer booth at the farmer's market. So there were some neat victories, some neat opportunities. I ended up running for re-election. After 1 year, I had to run for re-election, and ended up winning that by a larger margin, which was encouraging, and then served for another 2 years, and then my military training ended up being called back to active duty. I have not been deployed, but I was called back to active duty for about a year's worth of training. So I ended up going to Alabama for some training, and then ended up ending up that training in Arizona for 4 months of military intelligence training, and became while I was serving on the city council, I was finishing up my degree at the University of Florida, graduated from the University of Florida, and commissioned as an Army officer simultaneously. And so basically...
You show off.
it was busy times.
Sure.
I think what I learned in my early days, and I certainly fail often, early and often now too, but in my early days, I think what I did was I had a lot of the same dreams and passions and desire to make a difference, but I hadn't learned to be strategic in my approach to that, and again, build that team. And so I think that's one of the biggest differences that I learned from basically running the first time for student body president, and then running for city council, and then on after that. So that was a long monologue there, so I knew you have questions. Sorry about that.
No, that's absolutely. I actually have questions based on a lot of things you said. I would love to hear and this is a subject that hasn't come up yet, but the influence the military played on your leadership. Did it influence you one way or another? Did it help sharpen it?
Well, and I think that's one thing that as young leaders, I won't speak for all young leaders, but I know a lot of young leaders I know face is we have a lot of passion, a lot of excitement, and we're willing to try new things, do new things, dream big. We have a vision of kind of where we want to go, but sometimes discipline is tough in focusing that. And that's one of the things that military training, waking up on a regimented schedule, a lot of angry people yelling at you, and having to be very precise and disciplined, that certainly helps focus your vision and helps you kind of realize the importance and need for discipline. And then military leadership, what's neat about military leadership is it is all about servant leadership, which today our pastor actually preached on servant leadership, and I thought it was really neat listening to him preaching on that wall, knowing that this interview was coming up later. And military leadership is on servant leadership. Even if you are an officer, you're still with the men, you're still serving with them, you're still fighting with them. Officers fight and die alongside of enlisted, and someone is in charge and taking the lead, but it's certainly not a top-down approach always, and if it is, then quickly it doesn't work out too well. And so especially as a lieutenant, which is the rank, you start out as an Army officer, a commissioned officer, if you don't build cooperation among enlisted personnel, then you're going to have a very tough time. And so it's important to pull aside your senior enlisted people who've been in for a long time and have a lot of wisdom and experience, and learn from them and say, hey, listen, I don't think I know everything. Here's where my heart is on this and where I want to go with things, but I need your help. I want your help. And then to listen and to really learn from them. And so military leadership teaches you discipline. It teaches you how to lead in stressful situations. It teaches you to improvise. One of the things, I think the greatest lessons I've learned from military officer leadership training is when they'll take you through leadership reaction courses. And what they'll basically do is they'll say, it's almost like an obstacle course, and they vary, different leadership reaction courses, but they'll give you obstacles. They'll give you a limited amount of resources, and they'll tell you the goal. They give you some parameters, and then they let you figure it out. What they'll do is they'll say, I want you to get this barrel of whatever it is across this imaginary river, and you have all of your soldiers who will help out with this. You have one rope, one board, and you have to make it happen. And so that's when you have to go through the process of planning, assessing, figuring it out. And so different leadership styles emerge during those courses. And sometimes some leaders will rush in because they're timed events, and they'll rush in and start trying to do things before they think of a plan. Other leaders will try to do it all themselves. They're going to be Superman, and they're going to, carry the weight of the shoulders of their team on their own. And so it's important as a leader, the most effective ones, I think, typically take a step back, they take a deep breath, and they evaluate the situation. They come up with a clear, concise, very simple plan, and then they delegate out the task and execute from there. And so, for instance, one of them that we had when I did leadership development and assessment course, which is a month-long training course in Washington State, is where my particular course was. One of them we had a scenario of a downed pilot, and we had to basically create a rope bridge to take that downed pilot across an imaginary canyon, and they had marked off what was the imaginary canyon. And so we came up with a plan, and I delegated out, and I had one soldier on either side kind of helping facilitate the experience, and it worked out real well, and turned out to be a good experience. And that is very valuable in life, because I think a lot of times in life what happens is it's easy to see what we don't have instead of learning to just deal with the resources we have. And that's why I think those kinds of training experiences really have helped me in my current role, in my current job, and then just other jobs, in saying, here's the goal, here's the mission, we can make it happen, we just have to get creative.
Excellent. One of the things that you mentioned there that I actually haven't talked to anybody about, and I'm really thankful you brought it up. This idea of building a team. How did you go about that process? I know at first you didn't really know how to do that, and you developed that. Tell a little bit about your team that you put together and what you were looking for in each member to move everybody towards this common goal.
Sure. Well, first of all, I think that you have to shatter this perception that we have in America of the self-made man. There are really no self-made men or women. There are people who, and if they are, they've only accomplished a very small amount, because everyone, if you want to really accomplish something of great value and really impact the world, you have to build a team. And so I think that's the evolution of leadership, is building that team. But to do it, I think it's important to first realize you need it, obviously. And then when you start that process, to have a combination of factors, to be very proactive about it, but then also to realize that part of it's going to be starting where you are. And so two things. One, when I have the opportunity to speak to students, I've done a couple kind of guest lectures and classes and for students at various points. And one thing I always tell them is, when you're building the team, one of my favorite analogies is we live down in Florida where there's a lot of beaches, or you used to live down in Florida. Now you're up in DC where it's freezing cold. But
yeah, it is.
when you go to the beach and you're looking for shells, it's always fun to kind of walk up and down the beach and look for shells. But oftentimes you'll see a shell and you'll pick it up and it'll be cracked or broken, and you're like, it looked great, but it didn't turn out quite how I'd hoped or whatever. But really, essentially, whatever shells that the ocean has washed up on shore, those are the only shells you have available to you. Well, there's a different mentality when it comes to team building, which is a very proactive one, which is to be a scuba diver and to strap on some tanks, swim out and find the shell you want. And then the whole ocean becomes in play at that point. You're not just waiting for whatever the waves wash up on shore. And so that's why I tell students, when it comes to building a team, I think oftentimes what we do is we just settle for whatever's around us, and that's a great place to start. But you can be very, very proactive, and I'll give you some examples of this. So obviously there's some people around me who live close to me who I've met through just natural, whether it was in college or whether it was church, those kinds of things. But then I also have gone out and specifically recruited and talked to people. And one of my best friends, who also does political consulting, he is a guy who I'd seen some of his work. He does great graphic work, good message development for campaigns. He does neat websites, has a lot of great skills. And I literally sought him out, sat down with him, started talking to him, got to know him, and kind of very proactively tried to bring him on my team. And now he's running my campaign, thankfully, because he got approached by a lot of people, a lot of my opponents, and who also wanted him. But I had established that relationship a long time ago, and have helped him out with a lot of clients and various things too. And so I could give example after example of, and I don't always do this, but I try to. There was a young lady who was doing some neat things in our state, and I thought, wow, I'd like to get to know her and just learn from what she's learned as a young leader. So I sought her out, and that's not always easy. I think sometimes it's people get shy and they don't want to contact people, and you have to be careful about it, that it doesn't become just an annoying, fan club type of a scenario. But if there's a leader that's inspired you, I just read a book that really inspired me, and I just reached out and contacted the author, and we'll see what happens with that. He may never reach out back, or maybe he will. But I think the key is being very proactive in building the team you want, not just saying, well, I'm just going to, whatever washes up on shore, whatever, whoever's around me is just kind of who I'm stuck with. And then I think also you can, what you have to do also is have an idea of what you want on the team, where you're going with things. So if my goal was to build a building, I would probably work on having a lot of architects and engineers and science-based people who knew how to build buildings around me. For me, my goal is to make an impact in community leadership, and so I have a lot of people around me who are in that. But I also have some people who think completely differently than me, I try to hang out with them and learn from them because that brings about creativity.
Awesome, man. Very cool. One of the things that part of that story that you were telling earlier today is about telling the lady how to be, oh, my husband's at work and I can't, seem to find somebody to take care so I can go vote. And you did something that I think very few of us would have done. I want to kind of touch on the subject for a minute, is this idea of finding a way. And you did. You found a way. Did she bring her child and vote, or did she end up not taking you up on it?
Well, she did vote, and she was one of those 3 votes, of course, along with everyone else. She didn't end up. My mom did not end up needing to watch her child for her. Her husband ended up waiting in the van and watching it, and they swapped off who voted.
Awesome.
One voted, and then the other watched the baby. But what it did was it showed them that it would, not in an aggressive way, but in a very much can do whatever it takes mentality, like you're saying, which I agree. It's a whatever it takes mentality. And when you know where you're going and you're passionate about that, then what you do is, and like I said, you don't want to be that guy who's rude and obnoxious about things, but people can tell that you're passionate, and that inspires people and gives them a sense of urgency behind what you're doing. And so that's what it was, and I think that is a very important key. I think it's important to be flexible in your approach, but very focused and persevering in your goal. So the ultimate goal is there, but the way you approach it sometimes is flexible, and I think that's important because sometimes I think it's easy to get sidetracked on focusing on the process and missing out on the overall goal, and you miss a lot of opportunities, and because you're going to have setbacks, you're going to have things that don't go your way and don't go how you would hope they would. But the key is to continue to have that 30,000 foot view and see that the big picture, the vision, and realize that overall, if you keep moving forward, you're going to be able to make a difference. And one of our mottos in basic training was our unit was always forward. And even the U.S. military's motto when it comes to retreat is we never retreat. We fall back to reorganize, to reestablish the offensive. And so even the terminology we use is important, I think, when it comes to understanding failure, because you are going to fail. In fact, if you're a young leader who wants to make a difference, let me tell you, you're going to fail more than people who never make a difference or unsuccessful, because unsuccessful people are sitting in their house doing nothing, and so they're not going to fail because they're not trying anything. So if you're out there trying stuff, you're going to have failures, and the sooner you can learn from that, get used to that, and understand that that's part of the process, but keep maintaining forward momentum, then the better off you're going to be as a young leader.
On that same subject, comes into play is this idea of risk and whether or not you're willing to stick your neck out there for whatever it is you may be passionate or believe in. There's going to be risk involved. Can you talk about some of the risk that you took on as you've developed this type of leadership in your life and where you find yourself today?
Well, I think there's always a risk anytime you put yourself out there. And, when I got elected to the city council, I remember there were some people who I'd known in the past, and they started commenting on Facebook about how shocked that they were that I'd gotten elected. And so there's always going to be critics. And you mentioned what are some leadership quotes we like. I think we had talked about some leadership quotes, and one of my favorites is Theodore Roosevelt, and he talks about it's not the critic who counts. It's a lengthy quote, but basically he says it's not the person out throwing stones, it's the person who's in the arena, and he's kind of using a boxer analogy, who's marred by dust and sweat and blood, who's striving valiantly. And I really like that quote because it's so easy to get distracted on the criticism, and I think it's important to take feedback, honest, sincere feedback, sincerely, and learn from it, because leaders are humble and they listen and they're responsive to the people. But when someone's just being a critic, they're just a grumpy person and they're just throwing stuff at you just because they're either jealous or they just want to critique everything, then it's important to realize that it isn't the critic who counts, to keep rolling forward and to let that kind of just inspire you. And so I had to do that. That's certainly a risk. And then with any election, my arena is the political one. So for me, the very real risk is losing. If 3 people had not shown up, if 4 people had voted the other way, I would have lost. I would have been that guy who ran once but didn't win. And the second time around, I could have lost that election. And now I'm running for Clay County Commission, and I've put a significant financial investment of my own. I've saved up for a good while now, and so I put $20,000 of my own money into this race because I'm passionate about it. I believe in it. Some people buy new cars. I drive a '96 Nissan, and have chosen to save my money and invest it in this because I'm passionate about it and I believe I can make a difference. But at the end of the day, if I lose this election, that's all gone, and that's a risk. But it's a risk I'm willing to take because nothing of greatness is ever accomplished without risk. And I'm not going to wait around for the perfect time because that never will come. I'm going to, I've calculated and made some analysis, and certainly not just trying to naively jump into something, but I truly believe that I can make a difference, and we can make our community stronger. And so I'm getting involved, but there are always very real risks. Failure is a very real part of it. But when you get over that fear of failure, and when you realize that the worst case scenario isn't as bad as you sometimes think, then you move forward, because we're all going to fear failure. That's natural. That's human. The key is to realize that if you let failure be the determining factor in what you do, then that's really the ultimate failure. You've put yourself in a situation where you're making decisions based on avoiding risk instead of making decisions based on what's most important. And that's what I would say to young leaders. Prioritize, figure out what you're passionate about, know where you're going, and then set your course. But don't set your course based on risk avoidance.
Yeah, life's too short to avoid every risk on the planet. Really, pragmatically, you can't do it.
Absolutely.
So it's interesting you bring that up. On the previous podcast I just had with Nick Troiano, who's, I think he's going to end up running for Congress in Pennsylvania, for the 10th district in Pennsylvania. But he said, one of the things that people need to keep in mind and young leaders need to be aware of is when you fail forward, learn from it, how to deal with it, how to adjust with it. Because you're right, we're going to fail, but it's how we rebound from that. The saying they say, right, it doesn't matter how many times you've been knocked to the floor, it's how many times you get up. Let's kind of dive into criticism for a second. The old saying, you can't be a prophet in your own hometown. People come out of the woodwork, right, and say, well, how is that possible? I remember him in, whatever, high school or whatever the case may be. Pragmatically, how do millennial leaders and young leaders, how should they handle criticism? It's usually either ignore it or address all of it. Where do you find yourself?
Well, one thing, going back to Dr. Jay Strack in the Student Leadership University, he had a quote that still sticks out, and I wrote it and underlined it and highlighted it and circled it. He said, take criticism seriously, but not personally. And so I think it's important to learn from it, because I like feedback, whether it's web analytics on a website, whether it's Facebook's, page insights where you can see how much something was shared. I like feedback. I like the ability to have that two-way responsive system. Maybe it's the Army Intel officer in me, I'm not sure. But I think feedback is a very positive thing if it is specific. So if someone just says, I dislike you, that's hard to do much about. But if someone says, when you shared that last statement, you said too much, well, that's something you can work with. You can look at your speaking style and work on pausing more and saying less and formulating your thoughts before you speak. That's something you can do something about. And so I think it's important to overall be confident as a leader and not be so bogged down by criticism that there's a paralysis that occurs, like we talked about with the being willing to risk. But it is important to listen and to have honest feedback. And as a leader, especially a young leader, the perception is going to be that you're arrogant, that you think you know it all, that you're kind of brash. And so the more you have the ability to show people that you are passionate, excited, motivated, willing to be creative, but also willing to listen and walk slowly through the crowd and listen to what people have to say and be responsive, that's so vital. And the way you gain that trust and that ability to lead is by showing people, by saying, listen, I'm sorry. I don't always do things correctly. And hey, thanks for that feedback. That was great. Instead of getting a defensive posture, being willing to have that humble servant-like attitude. And I think we all know, especially from friends, and Proverbs is full of this, honest feedback and criticism from friends is valuable and needed, and that's where you have that accountability around you, and people will say that, and so you got to look in the mirror and say, hey, it's time to buckle down. That was some good feedback, and I'm going to learn from it. And then sometimes when people are critical, things way off the wall, you just smile and you just say, well, I guess it means I'm making a difference because I'm important enough that this person wanted to talk about me. So
Amen to that. It's cool. You touched on something that I've been thinking more and more about, is this idea of the intersection of humility and leadership. Can you give me your thoughts on that?
Well, it's so vital. It's not easy. It's vital, but not easy. And like I said, all these things are, I think, things we strive for, but not necessarily that we're always good at and always do real well. And so, but yeah, it's so important to have two factors: that vision and know exactly where you're going, and or have a general idea of where you're going and moving in that direction, but then that humility to adjust along the way. And so that's where you adjust the plan, but you're still focused on the overall goal. So I think if have insecurity as a leader and you're too weak in your mindset, then what you'll tend to do is be blown and tossed by the wind. That James leader, that you're kind of that rowboat out on the open sea, just blown every which way, and you have no direction, no true north. But if you're so focused and so determined that your way is the only way, then you aren't going to gain from that team. You aren't going to learn from the experiences of those around you and be able to do things. And so I do message development and work on kind of public relations as my full-time job currently. But in my campaign, I've had to check myself multiple times and say, I have got to be willing to listen to others and to the team around me when they'll give me suggestions and feedback, and not think that I know it all, I understand it all. Because we're all of us, if we're moving towards something, all of us are smarter than any one individual member of us. At some point, the buck has to stop with a leader and they have to make decisions, but they should and must get feedback in that process.
Absolutely, and it goes back to listening not only to people you serve, but taking advantage of the strengths and weaknesses of your team. That's part of why you build that team around you to help you filter through those messages. Do you have a team now working with you as you're running for the Clay County Commission seat?
Absolutely. We have basically right now what we have is we have the financial side. So my brother is a tax accountant, and so he is my campaign treasurer. We have a website, and so we have one lady doing the website in partnership with my consultant, and I've kind of given some guidance on that too. But then we have a team of people. He has a team of people that he relies on to help with the messaging and that kind of thing. Then what I do is I try to, as people come on board and ask how they can help or get involved, I try to give them very specific, detailed things. And that's one of the things I learned in my first campaign. My first campaign, I wanted people to help, but I wasn't very good at clarifying how I wanted them to help. And people want to help. I'm convinced if they're inspired and they're passionate about what you're passionate about, they want to help, but they don't always know how. And so it's so important for a leader not to get frustrated and say, no one's helping, or where are all the people, and to get frustrated. It's important for them to just be very, very clear in their expectations. So how can I help? Well, go get 10 of your friends to like our Facebook page, 10 friends that live in Clay County. That's a very specific goal, whereas can you just get the word out there is not very specific. And so I think as a leader, it's very important to be specific when people want to help and want to get involved, and to be able to channel that. And so we've tried to do that with our team, and my parents have been an enormous help. I actually have asked our pastor to kind of be the prayer support, because in a campaign it takes an emotional toll. There's a lot of ups and downs, and so I've asked several people to very specifically pray. So I think it's important knowing the strengths and weaknesses of the team, like you're saying, and knowing the gifts and giftedness. And so there are some people who love going door to door. Deborah Baker is a great lady she's a business owner over in Middleburg, which is an important area of the district. And she has just been enormously helpful, and she loves people. She loves getting out there. So I gave her a stack of cards, and she's out there handing them out and talking to people. She's setting up events. There are other people who are more on the technical side, and so you plug them in that way. And that's where meeting people where they're at is one of the things my boss always says. And he's an elected superintendent here in the county, and a longtime friend. He's that mentor I talked about. And he always says meet people where they're at, and I think that's important. And making it fun. It doesn't have to be hard. It doesn't have to be, there are going to be hardships and challenges, but there's no reason you can't have a little fun along the way.
Absolutely. Having fun, I think, helps fuel that passion. And so when you have that passion going, fun going, you enjoy the experience. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy, but I think you're absolutely right. One of the things I love to mention too is, leadership and developing ourselves, whether it's our speaking skills or our organizational skills, is a lifetime effort. I've been caught up in this idea of like, all right, I'm done, 4 years of college, I'm out, I'm not going to learn again. It was a couple of years ago where I was like, well, I think I'm studying and reading more now than ever. Do you have anything, I know the military's helped shape you, but do you have anything that, and perhaps it's that book you mentioned, that specifically has inspired you, strengthened you, and helped you develop leadership skills?
Sure. Well, there are a couple people who have been mentors throughout my life. Dr. Jay Strack, Charlie Van Zandt, who's the superintendent of schools here in Clay County, and his father's a state representative, and I value their feedback and mentorship throughout my life. Dr. Robbie Zacharias is one on the spiritual front. I love to listen to the way his mind works is amazing. I don't know if you're familiar with him and his ministry in apologetics. And there's my family, of course, has been, a huge support through the process. But one thing I also encourage people to do is I drive a lot between driving to work every day and then also driving throughout the district in my role as the public relations officer. So I'm in the car a lot, and what I do is listen to a lot of audiobooks and YouTube. I'll plug in YouTube and play it through my phone and then play it through my speaker system. And these podcasts now, I'm excited about listening to them because I'll pull up neat stories, whether it's a trailer for Amazing Grace, the movie, just to remind me, one of my favorite quotes in there is, if you haven't seen the movie, he says, no one of our age has ever taken power. And the prime minister responds to William Wilberforce, and he says, which is why we're too young to realize that certain things are impossible. And I love that quote. It gets me going every morning. And so sometimes when it's an early morning, it's tough. I'll listen to that. And so I would encourage you, it's such, like you said, a daily process. And I've probably read, a couple hundred books on leadership, but the most important thing is what I'm reading right now, what I'm doing now to grow and continue to learn. And so right now I'm reading a book called Seamless City. It's about the mayor of St. Petersburg who really brought together multiple segments of the community and a very specific vision to make their city a better place, make it the best city in the world. And he talks about very practical and very generalized leadership principles, and I just love it on how to bring together partnerships and that kind of thing. So I'm reading that. I'm excited about listening to these podcasts on young millennial leaders. I was inspired by listening to some of the other leaders you've interviewed, Carlos, and hearing their stories and their vision. And I love the gentleman you talked to who said he had called every news agency and tried to get a tour, and they all said no. And it just made me smile because there's so much you can relate to with young leaders and with other people who, they have a passion and a vision, and yeah, they're going to run into some obstacles and hear no a lot, but they don't care. They're just going to keep going and do it with a smile on their face. And so that made me smile. And so I think the key is to just daily be continuing to grow and learn. If you stop watering your plants, they're going to die. If you stop eating, you're not going to do too well. You're going to start losing weight. And so you've got to continue to grow, that daily process of growing. So I would encourage, as far as specific books, John Maxwell is another one who start with the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership if you haven't read that one. On networking, Never Eat Alone is a great one on networking with people out and about. There's a lot of great resources out there. And I think you talked about on your book, you're going to start posting some resources, and Trust is a book you talked. I think I was looking on your website. I'm planning on picking that up and reading that. The Importance of Trust. What was that book?
The Speed of Trust.
Speed of Trust, because you're right. Trust is essential. If there's not trust, then that's the foundation. And so I think the key is whatever resources. There are a lot of great ones out there, but whatever resources. It's just daily be continuing to read, whether it's Proverbs, or your quiet time, whether reading the Bible, or whether it's the podcast listening. I personally am an auditory learner, and so for me, listening to material as I drive into work is a great way to learn.
I really appreciate that. Selfishly, I ask people, what books or material or how they've developed, because I want to read them. So I'm gonna pick up a bunch of those. John Maxwell's 21 Irrefutable Laws, Never Eat Alone, Out and About, and so on and so forth. But I think you're right. This concept of if you stop watering your plants, what happens? And you've got to continue. And this is something I'm going to talk about in the future, but taking care of your spiritual side, your physical side, and your mental capacities, and keeping them all strong so that you are focused and centered all on the right things. How can we follow you today? When is the election, and when are the votes?
Sure. Well, I try to stay involved on Facebook and Twitter and social media. I need to get involved in Instagram. I haven't gotten there yet as much, but my Facebook is just Gavin Rollins. I have a personal page, and then I have a campaign page, Facebook page. And then I have a website, gavinrollins.com, pretty simple. So GAVINROLLINS.com. And you can, our social media is integrated into that website. So you can, if you go to the website, you can see how you can like the Facebook page and stay up to date. And then my Twitter is actually connected into my Facebook, thankfully. So it makes it a kind of easy. I just update my Facebook, and that updates Twitter, and so that's Gavin Rollins also. So
very cool.
Those are some good ways to stay involved and up to date. If anyone has specific questions for me, you can go. The website has contact information on it, but feel free to email me. It's gavinrollins@gmail.com is also a good way. And I'm excited. I appreciate you doing this, Carlos, and I'm excited about hearing the stories and just interacting, because what I would say in kind of closing is, leaders change their view of failure. They don't view it as something to be afraid of. They view it as a part of the process. So they go out there and they try things, and they're bold, and they just they're out there experimenting and learning and growing. They build a team around them. They understand that teamwork is essential, so they build that teamwork around them, and then they make the most of today. And that's why I think it's so neat. You understood that you're not going to be perfect overnight. This blog, this website, it's a work in progress, but you've started the journey. That's the key. You stepped into the Jordan River. I think of the children of Israel. God parted waters in the Old Testament in two ways. One was the Red Sea, and Moses, raised his staff, and the Red Sea parted. But a little while longer down that journey for the Israelites was a story where the Jordan River was up in front of the Israelites, and God told them to step into the water before he parted it. And so I think as we move along our journey, that's where the faith comes in. We have to step out into the water at times before we see that action. And so if you're waiting for the waters to part before you step out, then you might be waiting too long. And so it's important to initiate movement, to start necessary movement. And that's what you've done, and that's what I encourage leaders to do, is step out in faith and build the team around you.
I suspect we'll see a blog post on this very subject. Gavin, thank you so much for hopping on here with me. I'm going to be sure to post in all the show notes your Facebook, your contact information, so that people can follow you, continue to hear your journey. I hope to have you on someday as a commissioner for Clay County, and just to catch up with you, and if you would be willing then to share some of the stuff you've learned in the next several months. Good to talk to you, brother. I know we'll talk again soon.
Talking to you, and I plan to share share this blog and website with all the people I'm in contact with also.
Awesome. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.